We see laser perfection drilled holes, stone that has been somehow liquefied or almost kind of made vitrified and stuck together.
At 12,800 feet above sea level in Bolivia sits a field of stone blocks that has defeated every expert who ever studied it.
Researchers survey and measure the monolithic stones and H-blocks scattered around the archaeological site of Puma Punku.
For 120 years, archaeologists have walked this site, examined these stones, and left without answers. The blocks are cut from andesite and red sandstone, two of the hardest stones in the region. The site is called Puma Punku. Its builders are called the Tiwanaku. And what they did or did not do here in the Andes remains one of the most uncomfortable unsolved problems in archaeology. But in 2024, a 3D scanner was pointed at the H-blocks, and what it found inside those joints should not be physically possible. The Tiwanaku. The Tiwanaku were not a primitive people.
And they existed where Bolivia lies today.
That matters, because the mystery here is not that a weak civilization attempted something too big for them. The mystery is that even a powerful, sophisticated civilization should not have been able to produce what is at Puma Punku.
Mysterious ruins of Puma Punku, nearly 13,000 feet in the Altiplano of Bolivia.
They emerged around 300 AD on the southern shore of Lake Titicaca, the highest navigable lake in the world. At their peak, between 500 and 900 AD, their territory stretched across Bolivia, Peru, Chile, and Argentina. Their capital city held up to 40,000 people. They built raised agricultural fields that pulled harvests from elevations where crops have no business growing. They engineered drainage systems across flooded plains to make land farmable. They ran trade networks across the Central Andes. They carved massive stone statues, including the Bennett monolith, a single figure standing over 24 feet tall, cut from one piece of stone and hauled into position without modern machinery. In 1932, workers tried to relocate the Bennett monolith using 20th century equipment, modern machinery, trained workers, and they still managed to damage it during the move. That one incident is worth sitting with because the standard explanation for Puma Punku asks you to believe that the Tiwanaku moved hundreds of blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, across mountain terrain using nothing but rope and manpower. Now walk a quarter mile from the main Tiwanaku complex to Puma Punku. Every researcher who has made that walk reports the same reaction. Something is wrong. The level of craftsmanship does not belong to the same category of human work. The main complex is impressive. Stone walls, terraces, temples, the kind of construction that is clearly sophisticated but fits within what you would expect from a capable ancient civilization. Puma Punku does not fit. It looks like it came from somewhere else entirely. The copper tools recovered from Tiwanaku sites make it worse. Forensic analysis of those tools shows where patterns from cutting wood and soft stone, not andesite. Andesite scores 6 to 7 on the hardness scale. Copper scores 3. You cannot cut a harder material with a softer one. The tool disintegrates first. The very tools that are supposed to prove the mainstream explanation contradict it the moment you examine them closely. The Tiwanaku were real. Their achievements were real. But the physical evidence from their own tools says they did not build Puma Punku. And the man who first tried to prove that spent 50 years of his life being ignored for it. The man who measured everything and was ignored for it. Arthur Poznański was an Austrian-Bolivian engineer who arrived at Puma Punku in the early 1900s and never recovered from what he found. For over 50 years, he returned to the site. He measured the same blocks hundreds of times. He recorded angles, surface flatness, and internal geometries with the best equipment his era had. He published his findings, and mainstream archaeology ignored him. Not refuted, ignored. There is a significant difference between a claim being disproven and a claim being too uncomfortable to engage with. His most famous conclusion was about age. The Earth's axis does not point at a fixed spot in the sky. It wobbles slowly in a cycle that takes roughly 26,000 years to complete. That wobble shifts where the sun rises and sets on specific dates by measurable degrees over long periods of time. Poznański used that astronomical clock, combined with the orientation of structures at Tiwanaku, to calculate when the site was originally aligned. His conclusion was around 15,000 BCE. Modern radiocarbon dating places Tiwanaku construction between 300 and 900 AD. His methodology was flawed. That specific date is rejected by modern archaeology, and the radiocarbon evidence contradicts him directly. But his observations about the stonework were never challenged, not once. Every researcher who returned with better equipment confirmed what Poznański had recorded. Christopher Dunn, a professional manufacturing engineer, visited the site and immediately identified the surface precision as industrial in character. Other engineers with no alternative agenda have stated publicly that replicating the internal geometry of the H-blocks today would require CNC machining. CNC stands for Computer Numerical Control, the automated precision tooling used in modern factories to produce parts to exact specification, not similar technology. That exact class of equipment. Poznański also documented blocks that no longer exist. Pieces he photographed and measured in the early 1900s have since disappeared, looted, broken apart, carried away. The evidence is shrinking, and it will keep shrinking. The Bolivian government once commissioned a physical reconstruction of Puma Punku. Engineers were brought in to reassemble the blocks. They could not do it. The pieces would not come together in any coherent form. The project was quietly dropped. The failed attempt still sits at the site today, and almost no coverage of Puma Punku mentions it. That failed reconstruction is itself a confession that the standard explanation does not hold. Here is what makes that failure more specific. The H-blocks are not identical. Their dimensions vary slightly from piece to piece. Some researchers argue this means the blocks were produced in separate batches for different sections of a structure that was never completed. Others argue that a significant number of pieces are simply missing, removed over the centuries, and that the surviving blocks are fragments of a much larger set. Without the full inventory, the puzzle cannot be solved, and the full inventory no longer exists. The measurements kept pointing at the same problem, and that problem had a face: the H-blocks. The H-blocks, components that should not exist. Stand in front of one of these blocks and look at it carefully. The flat surfaces catch light in a way that hand-cut stone does not. There is no drift, no variation, no trace of the small human errors that appear in every piece of work done by hand. The interior corners, where two surfaces meet deep inside the block, are so sharp and so consistent that they look like they were pressed into shape rather than carved. The grooves running along the surfaces are so uniform in depth and width that they seem like they came from a machine. These are called H-blocks because of their shape when viewed from above. Two vertical columns connected by a crossbar, all carved from a single piece of andesite, not assembled from smaller pieces. One stone, shaped into a structure of interlocking surfaces, grooves, notches, and channels designed to connect with other blocks without any mortar. The geometry alone was meant to hold the structure together. Now consider the mainstream explanation for how that shaping was done. Archaeologists propose the Tiwanaku used diorite hammer stones. Diorite is a volcanic rock that measures 6 to 7 on the hardness scale, roughly equivalent to andesite. The idea is that workers pounded the surface repeatedly, striking the same area thousands of times to slowly remove material and shape the block. This technique was used in the ancient world. At the granite quarries of Aswan in Egypt, you can still see the evidence of it. Rough surfaces, uneven tool marks, the slow, laborious removal of rock bit by bit. The unfinished obelisk at Aswan is a textbook example of what diorite pounding actually looks like. The surfaces at Puma Punku do not look like that. Diorite pounding produces bulk removal, not precision finishing. To get from a rough pounded surface to the flatness observed at Puma Punku, you would need extensive additional grinding and polishing using abrasive materials. That process is real. The Egyptians used it. But in Egypt, that level of finishing appears on a small number of sacred objects after years of dedicated labor. At Puma Punku, the same precision appears across hundreds of blocks. The H-blocks show identical tolerances across multiple examples, as if they were produced to a specification rather than individually crafted. Hand finishing does not produce that. Hand finishing produces variation. The hand of the individual craftsman is always visible in the work. At Puma Punku, that hand is nowhere. Inside some blocks are hollow channels, narrow passages running through the interior of the stone, too narrow for any structural purpose. Some researchers believe they were designed to carry fluid. If that is correct, these are not simple building blocks. They are engineered components with internal plumbing. No civilization in pre-Columbian South America has ever been documented to design anything like that. Several H-blocks were found face down, their most precisely finished surfaces pressed against the earth. Those surfaces were never going to be seen. They were on the underside, and yet the precision on those hidden faces is identical to the precision on the visible ones. A craftsman cares about what people can see. An engineer follows the specification on every surface regardless. That distinction matters enormously here. When 3D scan data from H-blocks found near each other was digitally aligned, the mating faces matched to within the measurement limit of the scanner itself. Zero gap. The kind of fit that modern machinists call a gauge fit, achieved today only with precision machinery and repeated measurement during production. When researchers attempted a full digital reconstruction using all surviving block scans, the result matched no known architectural form, not a temple, not a wall, not a platform. Whatever Puma Punku was designed to be, it has no equivalent in the human architectural record. And then there is what the Spanish took. They dismantled sections of Puma Punku to use as raw material for a local church. What is left is not the site. It is what they did not bother to take. The most significant pieces may be gone forever, and what remains may be the least impressive fragments of something far greater. The logistics of the impossible. Imagine a modern construction crew on this plateau. Give them trucks, cranes, steel cables, and diesel engines. Their task is to move a 100-ton block of stone 10 miles across Andean terrain with ravines, steep slopes, and no roads. Now remove every machine they have, hand them rope and timber, then cut the oxygen in the air by 40%. That is the standard explanation for how Puma Punku was built. At 12,800 feet above sea level, the human body is already under stress doing nothing. Workers at this altitude tire faster, need more rest, and accomplish significantly less physical work per hour than workers at lower elevations. Sustained heavy labor here is brutal even with modern nutrition. For ancient workers moving 100-ton blocks by hand, the physical cost of each day would have been enormous. The Andesite blocks came from a quarry approximately 10 miles away. The red sandstone used in other blocks came from over 50 miles away. These are not manageable distances across flat ground. These are mountain routes through some of the harshest terrain in South America. In 2020, researchers traced the specific route between the Andesite quarry at Copacabana and Puma Punku. They were looking for any physical trace of the mass transport operations that moving hundreds of massive blocks would have left behind. Worn paths, abandoned tools, rope fragments, timber remains, anything at all. They found nothing. Transport operations at that scale do not disappear. They leave marks in the soil, along routes, in the rock. Those marks are not there. The absence of evidence is not a footnote. It is a central problem. Engineers have calculated that moving the largest blocks by rope and ramp at that altitude would have required thousands of workers sustained over decades. Tiwanaku population estimates cannot support committing that proportion of their people to one construction project, while also maintaining the agriculture and trade networks their civilization ran on. 3 of the largest blocks have undersides that show no evidence of being dragged, no tool marks, no abrasion from contact with ground. They sit on natural bedrock as though they were always there. Dragging a 100-ton block across rocky ground leaves damage on the underside of the stone. That damage is not present. Beneath several blocks, geologists found a silt layer consistent with long-term water exposure. Some researchers argue the site experienced a major flood event. If accurate, the original construction predates the Tiwanaku occupation by a period that the accepted timeline cannot accommodate. The quarry sources are known, the distances are measured, the workers do not exist in the numbers required, the transport evidence is absent, and the blocks are there anyway. The 2024 scan, the numbers that should not exist. The structured light 3D scanner works by projecting precise patterns of light onto a surface. When those patterns hit the stone, they bend slightly depending on the shape underneath. The machine reads those distortions and calculates surface geometry down to 0.01 millimeters, 1/10 the thickness of a human hair. This is the technology aerospace engineers use to verify that aircraft engine components meet exact manufacturing specifications. When a fraction of a millimeter is the difference between a functioning part and a dangerous one, this is the machine you use. They pointed it at the H-blocks, and the numbers came back.
Now I'm going to film with the Gauss meter across the face of one of the H-blocks.
The flat surfaces measured flat to within 0.05 millimeters across spans of several feet. To feel what that means physically, place your fingertip on a surface and try to detect a gap of 0.05 millimeters. You cannot. You cannot see it either. That level of flatness across that distance does not come from hand sanding. It comes from precision grinding machines that actively measure the surface while they work and correct in real time. The internal corners of the H-blocks deviated from a perfect 90-degree angle by less than 0.1 degrees. That is a tolerance that trained machinists work to using calibrated instruments in controlled workshop conditions. The grooves held their depth to within 0.1 millimeters along their entire length, walls parallel, floors flat, not approximately, to within 1/10 of a millimeter every time across every groove measured. Then the scanner found something that has received almost no coverage: microstriations on the block surfaces, tiny parallel lines running in a perfectly consistent direction. When you strike stone against stone, the impact spreads outward in a radial pattern from the point of contact. When you sand a surface by hand, the scratches run in random or directional patterns depending on how your hand moves. Parallel microstriations in a perfectly regular formation are what a rotating cutting tool leaves behind: a spinning disc, a rotating wheel, something that revolves at consistent speed and cuts in a consistent direction. No such tool from the Tiwanaku period has ever been found. Not at this site, not anywhere in their cultural record. The researchers published carefully. They documented without claiming to know the cause. But the data does not need interpretation. It needs only to be read honestly. These are not the marks of ancient hand tools. They are the marks of precision manufacturing. And the question of what produced them has no comfortable answer. Who actually built this? When the Spanish arrived in South America in the 1500s, a priest named Juan de Betanzos recorded Inca oral history. He asked about the stone monuments on the plateau. The Inca told him Puma Punku was built by giants in a single night before the sun existed. The Inca were the most powerful civilization in the Western Hemisphere. They had conquered the descendants of the Tiwanaku. They had engineers who built mountain highways, suspension bridges, and stone cities at extreme elevation. They were not a people who frightened easily or reached for legend without reason. And when they stood at Puma Punku, they looked at it and said they did not know who made it. They said it came from before their world began. That is not a primitive people being superstitious. That is a highly capable civilization standing in front of something so far beyond its own ability that the only explanation available to them was the supernatural. Forensic stratigraphy is the science of reading soil layers to determine the sequence of events at a site. At Puma Punku, those layers tell a complicated story. Some researchers, publishing in peer-reviewed journals, argue the stratigraphic evidence points to a construction event that predates the Tiwanaku entirely. Not by decades, by a significant margin. That finding has not been refuted. It has been ignored. The precision signature at Puma Punku does not appear only at Puma Punku. At Sacsayhuaman, the massive fortress above Cusco, stone blocks weighing up to 200 tons are fitted together so tightly that a sheet of paper cannot pass between them. At Ollantaytambo, the temple stonework shows the same interior corner precision and surface flatness found at Puma Punku. The ancient fitted walls of Cusco itself, built according to the official record by the Inca, display surface tolerances that Inca tools should not have been capable of producing. These sites are attributed to different civilizations at different time periods with no documented contact between the groups responsible. When engineers measure the surface tolerances across all of them, they find the same precision fingerprint. Either multiple unconnected civilizations independently developed identical manufacturing capability, or one earlier civilization built all of it, and the later cultures inherited what was already there. The human arrival timeline in the Americas keeps being revised backward. Monteverde in Chile now places people in South America 18,500 years ago. Footprints at White Sands, New Mexico were dated in 2021 to over 21,000 years ago.
And dry lake beds in New Mexico's White Sands National Park. Researchers have spent years examining ancient footprints.
The old rigid timeline is breaking apart, and every revision opens more space for what the evidence at Puma Punku has always been pointing toward. Someone came before. Someone who cut stone to industrial tolerances and then vanished so completely that even the Inca, standing on the same ground centuries later, had no memory of them. The 2024 scans did not close that question. They made it impossible to ignore. What Puma Punku is really telling us. The Inca said the gods built it. We now have millimeter-level scan data that shows why they said that. Whatever produced those surfaces was operating at a level the Inca could not reach, a level the Tiwanaku could not reach, a level that, in several measurable respects, we still cannot fully account for today. Archaeology has underestimated ancient people before. LiDAR scanning over the Guatemalan jungle exposed Maya cities so vast that every previous population estimate had to be revised upward. Engineers measuring granite work inside Egyptian temples found surface tolerances that challenged modern replication. The Antikythera mechanism, pulled from a Greek shipwreck, turned out to be a fully functioning mechanical computer built over 2,000 years ago. Every generation of scholars has eventually been forced to admit that the people who came before were more capable than assumed. But Puma Punku is a different kind of problem. At those other sites, the gap was between what scholars assumed and what patient human effort can actually achieve. At Puma Punku, the gap is between what the physical evidence shows and what any documented pre-industrial technology could produce. Those are not the same problem. No team has ever produced Puma Punku-level precision using the tools the standard model assigns to the Tiwanaku. Not under controlled conditions, not in any demonstration, not once. The mainstream explanation has been offered for 120 years, and it has never been proven in practice. What no side fully confronts is the silence around the development of this skill. Every major human achievement leaves evidence of how it was learned: apprentice work, failed attempts, tools, waste material from production. The progression from rough to refined is always visible in the archaeological record. At Puma Punku, that progression does not exist. The precision appears fully formed, at a level found nowhere else in the Tiwanaku record before or after. No buildup, no learning curve, no transitional examples. The knowledge that created this site was not passed down. By the time the Spanish arrived, the Inca had no memory of it. They pointed at the blocks and named the gods. And standing on that plateau today, looking at scan data that reads like a factory inspection report, it is difficult to argue they were wrong about the scale of what happened here. We know how flat the surfaces are. We do not know how they were made flat. We know the angles are precise to fractions of a degree. We do not know what cut them. We know the blocks were engineered to fit together. We cannot determine what structure they were meant to form. The measurements are in. The mystery is deeper than it has ever been, and the stones are still there on a cold plateau at 12,800 feet, keeping every answer to themselves.